The hall in Nyali town smells like old polish and fresh flowers, and Tessa stands just behind the curtain, holding the note she has kept in her pocket for weeks. Her hands shake a little, so she hums a small tune to calm herself. A tiny laugh escapes her because she still can't believe she has reached this moment. She peeks at the front row and sees Mama Cade, her boss's wife, the woman who has rolled her eyes at every idea Tessa has ever shared. Tonight Mama Cade's face looks heavy, almost like she is waiting to rain on someone. Tessa remembers all those moments when she spoke up in meetings and was met with that same slow, sharp eye roll that felt like a pinch on the inside. Those tiny hurts rise in her chest now, warm and bright, but she presses her feet into the floor and takes a deep breath. The nervous laugh on her lips softens into a steady smile only she understands, a smile that says she has carried those insults long enough and she won't bend anymore. Someone calls her name. The lights shift. Tessa steps forward into the glow, and the noise of the hall drops into a soft hush. Every small humiliation, every rolled eye, every moment she almost gave up gathers inside her as she moves toward the microphone. It feels like the whole world is holding its breath with her, and she knows this moment can break her or lift her. So she raises her chin, lets her heartbeat settle, and walks into the light as if it now belongs to her. For months Tessa carried small humiliations the way other people carry old receipts in their pockets. They showed up in her mind at strange moments, and played like a bad movie she did not want to watch. She remembered the day at Mazzy Market when she stood in front of the community stall with her idea for a small library. She had spoken with hope, with her hands moving as she explained how children could borrow books after school. But as soon as she finished, she saw Mama Cade's eyes slide sideways. It was not a loud reaction. It was a tiny shift, a quiet signal that said her idea was nothing more than something cute. That small look cut deeper than any shouted insult, because it told her she was not taken seriously. She remembered another day in Sierra Hall when she stood up at a council meeting. Her voice shook a bit, but she still shared her plan for weekend reading spaces. Before she even finished her sentence, she heard a soft scoff from Mama Cade. It was so quick that most people would have missed it, but the men sitting nearby heard it and gave each other small smiles as if Tessa had said something foolish. She sat down slowly, trying not to show how much it hurt. Her cheeks felt hot and her throat felt tight. She kept her eyes on her notebook and told herself to breathe. At home, she tried to shake it off. Django held her hand and said she should ignore it. He meant to comfort her, but his calm tone sometimes felt like a half apology for something she wished he understood better. She did not blame him. She just wished someone could see how each tiny moment chipped at her confidence in quiet ways that no one else noticed. On the bus, she trained herself to laugh so she would not cry. Sometimes it worked, but sometimes her laugh sounded sharp, almost like she was scolding herself for feeling hurt. There were nights when she reached home so tired that she lay face down on her pillow and let the tears fall into the cloth. She cried so softly that even the morning sun could not tell. She woke early pretending nothing had happened, though her eyes felt heavy. But each small humiliation planted something inside her, a slow burn, a quiet push. She realized she was learning how to bend without breaking. She was learning how to stand a little straighter each time someone tried to make her smaller. Every eye roll from Mama Cade, every dismissive look, every whispered laugh behind her back became something she stored, not out of bitterness, but out of a growing strength she did not know she had. She began to understand herself better. She learned that her pain could be turned into fuel. She learned that every night she cried in private made her next morning stronger. She learned that she could rise again and again. And each time she rose with a voice that was a little steadier, a little braver, and a little more ready for the moment when she would finally speak in a room full of people and make them listen. When the Riverside schools in Korai District lost their funding, something inside Tessa changed. The reading rooms closed one by one, and she kept thinking about the children who used to sit on the floor with books in their laps. She imagined their empty afternoons, their quiet disappointment, and it felt like a heavy drum beating in her chest. She tried to ignore it at first, telling herself someone else would fix it, but the thought followed her everywhere. It stayed with her when she walked to work, when she cooked, even when she tried to sleep. Soon she understood she could not stay quiet. She had to do something, even if she did not know where to begin. She started drawing small sketches on scraps of paper. A van filled with storybooks, a little corner where children could read, a tiny stage where young people could practice speaking. At the cooperative tea stall, she shared pieces of her idea with anyone who would listen. She used humor to pull people in, telling small jokes to keep them at the table. When strangers laughed, even a little, she felt her courage rise. One afternoon she met an old teacher who listened with soft eyes. When Tessah described how a child once held a borrowed book like it was treasure, the teacher let out a gentle awe. That sound made Tessah laugh and then swallow hard because for the first time she felt real hope. Someone understood. Someone cared. The work grew from a spark into a plan. Night after night she sat at her small table with maps spread out and a cheap pen between her fingers. She stayed up late drawing routes for the reading van and listing supplies she might need. She searched for ways to make it possible even though the budget looked impossible. She told herself that if she could get one door to open, the rest would follow. Some nights she felt strong. Other nights she felt foolish and wiped away tears she didn't want her husband to see. But she kept going. When she finally presented her plan at a community meeting, the room went quiet for a moment. Tessah stood there with her papers, her heart pounding. Then she saw it. Mama Cade, sitting with her arms crossed, rolling her eyes slowly, almost proudly, as if Tessah had performed a trick she found boring. The eye roll was longer than usual, sharper, almost mocking. A few people whispered. Someone chuckled. For a moment Tessah felt the old sting, the kind that made her want to shrink. But then she remembered the children, the lost reading rooms, the way the little teacher had nodded with hope. She lifted her chin and kept speaking. As she explained the budget, it sounded less like a dream and more like a lifeline. Her voice grew firmer. She didn't look at Mama Cade again. She looked at the people who leaned forward. She looked at the ones who seemed curious. She looked at the ones who were listening with both doubt and interest. And in that moment, she realized her plan was no longer just an idea. It was a promise she was ready to fight for, even if she had to start alone. The days that followed turned into a long road of work that no one could see from the outside. Tessah spent night after night sitting at the small table in her living room, typing grant applications on a borrowed laptop that overheated every 20 minutes. Sometimes she wrote until midnight, sometimes until the birds started singing. Her eyes burned, but she kept going because each form felt like a small door she might push open. When she wasn't writing, she was in the old church hall near the market, meeting with anyone who showed interest. The hall smelled like dust and old wood, but to her it felt like a beginning. Slowly, people started joining her. The first was a retired librarian from Lamu Bay, a quiet man with a soft voice who believed books could fix more than people imagined. Then came a cheerful radio host who loved telling community stories on air. He said Tessah's dream reminded him of the nights he grew up listening to his grandmother read. After that came a small group of teenagers who surprised her. They walked into the hall one evening and said they wanted to help. They told her they believed anyone could change a street if they had a ladder made of books. Their hope made her smile in a way she hadn't in months. The work grew in small moments. One evening Tessah asked a teenager to read aloud at a meeting, and the girl gave a shy ha-ha before she started, her voice shaking but brave. Another day, an elderly volunteer pinned flyers to lampposts while his hand trembled from age, yet he refused to stop until every street had one. Tessah watched him with a tight feeling in her chest because she knew he was giving everything he had. Then came the day when the first small grant finally arrived. It wasn't much, but when Tessah opened the email she froze, stared, and then let out one soft cry, just a single tear rolling down her face. It was the kind of moment that made every sleepless night feel worth it. She pressed her hand over her mouth and whispered a thank you to no one in particular. But even as her support grew, Mama Cade's attitude sharpened. The eye rolls turned into pointed comments that she delivered loudly enough for others to hear. At the market she said Tessa was chasing attention. At a luncheon she asked, with a thin smile, whether Tessa had finally tired of playing hero. Each remark stung in a fresh way, but Tessa refused to let it stop her. She saw that the community was starting to believe in her project, one small win at a time. A bookshelf someone repaired and dropped off, a stack of pencils donated by a shop owner, a mother who brought old storybooks wrapped in a cloth bag. Each tiny victory built her credibility. Brick by brick, piece by piece, the dream was becoming real. Tessa could feel something shifting. People who once looked past her were now stopping to ask how they could help. Children waved at her when she walked by. And though the work was tiring, it filled her with a quiet strength. For the first time, she started to feel like someone whose voice mattered. The week before the fundraising gala felt like a storm that followed Tessa everywhere. She woke early and went asleep late, practicing her speech until her voice felt thin. She stood in front of the mirror, trying out pauses and small jokes that sounded warm and real, little ha-ha moments that she hoped would make the crowd relax. She wrote the children's names in the margins of her notes, whispering each one as if calling them into the room with her. She wanted the audience to see the kids the way she saw them, with their bright eyes and quiet hunger for stories. Every time she practiced, she imagined them sitting in the front row, cheering her on. But tension wrapped around her days like a tight ribbon. Mama Cade whispered doubts wherever she went. At a luncheon she said Tessa's speech sounded too emotional. At the coffee stall she lifted an eyebrow and asked if Tessa was really ready for such a big stage. Those small digs slid under Tessa's skin and pulled out the same old fear that she wasn't enough. Sometimes Tessa felt herself shrinking back into that woman who used to stay quiet in meetings. But each time she felt small, she reminded herself of the children, the van, the library that didn't exist yet but needed to. Her husband Django tried to help in his own sweet way. One evening, while she practiced in the living room, he walked behind her and pinned an extra clean shirt on her back like a cape. Then he made a silly face that caught her off guard. She burst out laughing, and the laugh turned into something softer, almost like a sob. He put his arms around her, and they stood there breathing together until she felt strong again. The night before the gala, Tessa returned home tired and nervous. When she pushed open her door, she saw a small piece of paper on the counter. She picked it up slowly. In simple handwriting it said, "We believe." No name. No clue who had left it. Tessa pressed the note to her chest and let out a breath that was half a laugh and half a cry. For the first time that week, she felt calm wash over her. She moved through her last rituals with quiet focus. She brewed one final cup of black coffee and held the warm mug with both hands. She went to meet a close friend who squeezed her arm gently and told her, "You've already done the hard part." Tessa nodded, feeling the truth of it settle inside her. Later, she practiced her breathing in slow counts, learning the rhythm that would keep her steady under the bright lights. She whispered her opening line into the air and felt the words settle comfortably on her tongue. When she finally lay down to sleep, she kept the note on the pillow beside her. She closed her eyes knowing that whatever fear she carried, she also carried hope, support, and a growing belief in her own voice. Tomorrow, she would walk onto that stage not alone, but lifted by everyone who believed she could do it. The night of the gala felt unreal the moment Tessa walked through the doors. The hall seemed alive, almost breathing. Chandeliers blinked softly overhead, throwing warm light across the room. Waiters moved like quiet shadows carrying trays, and the soft murmur of the guests rose and fell like waves. Tessa stood behind the curtain with her hands shaking, and for a second she wondered if her heart was beating too loudly. It felt like the whole hall could hear it. Someone called her name and she stepped forward, feeling the weight of every eye turning toward her. As she reached the stage, she spotted Mama Cade sitting in the front row, arms crossed, face sharp. Right on cue, the familiar eye roll appeared. It was slow, practiced, almost elegant, the kind of roll meant to peel confidence off someone. For a heartbeat, the old fear rose inside Tessa, but she reminded herself that she had walked too far and carried too many children's hopes to let one look break her now. She gripped the sides of the podium, breathed in, and began. Her opening sentence was simple, a small joke she had practiced in front of her mirror, and it drew a soft laugh from the crowd. A gentle, human sound that loosened her shoulders. The hall seemed to relax with her. She told a short story about a child in Korai who held a borrowed book like treasure, turning the pages as if they were gold. As she spoke, she watched the audience lean forward, their faces softening, their attention settling on her like a calming hand on her back. Midway through her speech, she said a line she had kept close to her heart, one she wrote during a quiet midnight when she felt tired and brave at the same time. When she delivered it, someone in the front row let out an involuntary awe. The sound hit her like a warm wave. Her voice cracked not from fear but from the weight of the story she carried. She let the crack stay. It made the moment honest. She continued, guiding the room gently, then firmly, through every part of her dream. Humor opened the door. Real human details, children reading on old mats, teenagers fixing broken shelves, pulled people closer. Then came the conviction, rising inside her like a tide she could not hold back anymore. She spoke of the reading van, of the neighborhoods it could touch, of the futures it could change. Her voice grew stronger with each sentence, and she could feel the room shifting with her words. She glanced at Mama Cade again. The woman's eyes had narrowed at first, puzzled, maybe annoyed. But as Tessa continued, those eyes slowly widened. The change was small but clear. It was the look of someone watching a story they didn't expect, someone realizing the person they had dismissed might be standing taller than anyone in the room. By the time Tessa reached her final lines, the hall was silent. Not the cold kind of silence, but the warm one that comes when everyone is holding the same breath. Tessa stood there, glowing softly under the lights, knowing she had not only spoken but truly been heard. When Tessa reached the center of her speech, something in the room shifted so quietly at first that she almost didn't notice. She laid out her plan in simple words, breaking down the budget the way she had practiced late at night at her kitchen table. She spoke slowly, making sure everyone understood that this wasn't charity, it was partnership. It wasn't pity, it was possibility. She explained how the reading van would travel from block to block, how volunteers would guide the children, how every coin given would turn into pages opened, stories shared, dreams started. As she spoke, the hall grew warmer, almost softer, as if the walls themselves leaned closer to hear her. People who had come only because they felt they had to now sat up straighter. Tessa saw a banker in the third row, a man who had arrived looking stiff and closed off, quietly wipe his eye with his thumb. Next to him, a teacher raised a small fist in the air when Tessa mentioned how reading could help children believe in themselves. The radio host who had supported her from the beginning snapped a photo, sensing this moment was something the whole town would talk about in the morning. And then she looked at Mama Cade. The woman's usual eye roll began, slow and practiced, the same one Tessa had seen 100 times. But halfway through, it stopped. Mama Cade's expression loosened, almost melting. Her eyes widened the smallest bit, as though she was seeing Tessa fully for the first time. Then, to Tessa's shock, a small, trembling smile appeared on her face, a smile she tried to hide behind her hand. It wasn't a proud smile, but a surprised one, the kind people make when they realize they misjudged something important. Tessa kept speaking, her voice steady and bright. She shared one last story about a child who had once asked her if books could make someone brave. The room held its breath. Then someone stood. It happened slowly, like a leaf lifted by a gentle wind. A woman near the back pushed herself to her feet. Another followed. Then a man. Then two. Before Tessa fully realized what was happening, the entire hall was rising, all at once, all together. It was not planned. It was not polite. It was instinct, and then came the sound. It wasn't clapping at first. It was an exhale, a soft cry. And then the applause hit, loud, bright, rolling through the hall like thunder. People clapped with their whole bodies. They shouted. They laughed. Some cried openly, wiping their cheeks without shame. The room filled with a feeling so powerful that Tessa felt it through her shoes and up her spine. The banker who had cried now clapped the hardest. The teenagers at the back who had helped with flyers were jumping up and down. Even the waiters who were supposed to stay still were smiling at her. Tessa stood there, hands shaking, heart full. The applause didn't weaken. It grew. It carried her. It wrapped around her like a warm blanket she had waited her whole life to feel. In that moment she understood that her voice, once dismissed with a single eye roll, now held a whole room standing on its feet. When the applause finally softened into excited chatter, Tessa stayed still for a moment, letting the warmth of it settle inside her. The hall felt completely different now. Minutes ago it had been a place of nerves and bright lights. Now it buzzed with hope. People rushed toward her in small waves. Donors handed her checks with quick smiles. Volunteers offered their time, their cars, their skills. The teenagers who had helped her at the church hall came running up with books hugged tight to their chests, their eyes shining like they had just witnessed magic. Tessa laughed, a soft and surprised sound that rose from somewhere deep in her. She had never felt so seen. At the edge of the crowd, Mama Cade stood still. Her face looked tired, almost washed clean, as if she had fought with herself and finally stopped. When she stepped forward, Tessa felt her breath catch. Mama Cade cleared her throat, looked down, and said quietly, "I misjudged you." The words hung in the air, fragile and honest. Tessa didn't respond with pride or victory. She simply said a small, sincere line meant to release them both. The line made Mama Cade laugh, and then they both found themselves wiping their eyes in a strange mix of relief and understanding. It felt like rain after a long season of dust. Children gathered around the stage, tugging at Tessa's sleeves, asking when the reading van would start. Volunteers began forming small groups, already planning routes and schedules. Tessa's face glowed, her eyes still wet but steady. She bent down when she heard a shy voice calling her name. A small child stood there, repeating a poem she had taught them weeks ago. The child ended with a tiny, proud ha-ha. Tessa smiled so wide her cheeks hurt. In that moment she knew the truth. She was no longer the woman pushed aside by eye rolls. She was the woman whose words made a whole room rise. Her voice now had a place no one could take away.